It took exactly 9 words for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to realize she'd just insulted the wrong Southern gentleman. Perhaps the senator should take an economics class. 9 words. That's all it took. 9 words spoken with such casual condescension, such reflexive arrogance, such absolute certainty of intellectual superiority that she never saw the trap she was walking into. She never saw the lion she was poking, never realized that the folksy Southern lawyer with the reading glasses and the comically oversized accordion file was about to deliver an education she'd never forget. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me set the scene, because the context makes the destruction so much sweeter. It was a joint Senate-House hearing on economic policy and American competitiveness, one of those Washington spectacles that usually produces nothing but sound bites and partisan talking points. The hearing room was packed. C-SPAN had multiple cameras rolling, knowing that with AOC testifying about her Green New Deal proposals, fireworks were likely. She sat at the witness table, flanked by squad members in the gallery behind her, looking every bit the confident young revolutionary. Designer glasses, bold red lipstick, that practiced expression of earnest concern for working people. She'd been testifying for about 45 minutes, throwing around buzzwords like intersectionality and systemic change and transformative justice, without anyone challenging her on what any of it actually meant. Then it was Senator John Kennedy's turn to ask questions. He sat at the far end of the committee bench, bifocals perched on his nose, organizing papers from an accordion file so absurdly thick that it looked like a prop from a comedy sketch. He looked like every Southern lawyer you've ever seen. Slightly rumpled suit, tie just a bit askew. That thick Louisiana drawl that made every sentence sound like he was telling a story on a front porch somewhere. Easy to underestimate. Fatal to dismiss. "Congresswoman," he began, his voice friendly and curious, "I've been listening to your testimony about the Green New Deal, and I have to admit, I'm a bit confused by some of the numbers. Your plan calls for eliminating all fossil fuel use within 10 years, retrofitting every building in America, and guaranteeing jobs for everyone. The Congressional Budget Office estimates the cost at around $93 trillion over a decade. Now, the entire U.S. GDP is about $25 trillion per year. So, I'm trying to understand." That's when she made her mistake. AOC interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "Senator, with all due respect, perhaps you should take an economics class instead of relying on outdated thinking from old Southern men who don't understand modern economic theory. The costs are investments, not expenses. And frankly, this kind of simplistic analysis is exactly why we need new leadership that actually understands the complexities of contemporary economic systems." The room went dead silent. Every reporter's head snapped up from their phones. The cameras zoomed in. Squad members in the gallery actually looked nervous. They knew Kennedy's reputation, even if AOC apparently didn't. Kennedy slowly removed his reading glasses, set them down on the desk in front of him with exaggerated care, and smiled. That smile. Anyone who'd ever seen John Kennedy cross-examine a hostile witness knew that smile. It was the smile of a predator that just realized the prey walked right into the kill zone. He let the silence stretch. 5 seconds. 10. 15. AOC shifted uncomfortably, perhaps beginning to realize she'd miscalculated. The committee chairman looked like he wanted to intervene, but couldn't figure out how. Finally, Kennedy spoke, his voice still honey-sweet. "Well, now, Congresswoman, that's mighty generous of you to offer educational advice. Very kind. I appreciate that." He paused, the smile growing. I did take some economics classes, as it happens, at Vanderbilt University, where I graduated with honors. Then at the University of Virginia School of Law, where I studied constitutional economics and economic policy. And then at Oxford University, where I was a Rhodes Scholar and studied under Professor John Eatwell, among others. Brilliant man. Really knew his economic theory. Another pause. He picked up a document from his stack. You studied economics at Boston University. Is that right? International Relations and Economics, I believe. How'd you do in your econ classes? I'm just curious, since you're offering to educate me. AOC's face was starting to turn red, but Kennedy wasn't done. But you know what? You're absolutely right about one thing. I am an old Southern man, guilty as charged, and I do rely on some old-fashioned thinking. Things like basic arithmetic, supply and demand, the relationship between incentives and outcomes, outdated concepts like that. He opened his accordion file and papers spilled across his desk. Now, since you think I need educating, why don't you educate me? Let's go through your Green New Deal line by line. I've got questions. I've got your own statements, lots of them. And I've got a whole mess of facts here that I reckon might surprise you. Kennedy looked directly into the C-SPAN camera. Folks watching at home, what you're about to witness is what happens when ideology meets arithmetic, when confidence meets competence, when a bartender who took some economics classes at BU tries to lecture a Rhodes Scholar economist. Stay with me. This is going to be educational. He turned back to AOC and his expression changed. The folksy charm was still there, but underneath it was something sharp and dangerous. Let's begin your education, Congresswoman. Kennedy settled back in his chair, the very picture of Southern comfort. But his eyes were sharp as he pulled out the first section of documents. Now, Congresswoman, before we discuss your plan to revolutionize the entire American economy, I'm curious about something. See, you talk a lot about income inequality, about the rich not paying their fair share, about working-class struggles, and I respect that. Those are important issues, but I'm having trouble reconciling your message with your lifestyle. Maybe you can help this old Southern man understand the nuance I'm missing. He pulled out a large photo, had it displayed on the screen behind him. September 13th, 2021, the Met Gala. You attended wearing a custom dress that said, "Tax the Rich," in big red letters across the back. Powerful statement. Very on-brand. The dress was designed by Brother Vellies, a luxury brand. Now, you've said the dress was borrowed and the ticket was gifted, which is mighty convenient. But let's talk about that ticket. Kennedy pulled out a financial document. Tickets to the Met Gala cost $35,000. $35,000, that's more than many Americans make in 8 months of full-time work. And you attended this event, one of the most exclusive, elitist gatherings in the world, surrounded by billionaires and millionaires, celebrities and designer gowns worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, all to make a statement about taxing the rich. He looked up, genuinely puzzled. Now, help me understand the economics of that. You're telling working-class Americans that the rich are the problem, while you're literally partying with them at an event that costs more to attend than a year of community college. Where's the nuance there? AOC tried to respond. It was about making a statement in spaces where... Making a statement, Kennedy interrupted gently. I see. Very important. Now, let's talk about another statement you made with your choice of vehicle. He pulled out DMV records. You drive a Tesla Model 3. Beautiful car. Very environmentally conscious. Costs about $48,000 depending on the options. Now, that's $8,000 more than the median household income in your district. The people you represent, many of them make less in a year than your car costs. Kennedy flipped through papers, narrating as he went. And you bought this Tesla while pushing the Green New Deal, which would eliminate gas-powered vehicles. Force Americans to switch to electric cars they can't afford. See, the average working person in your district can't just drop $48,000 on a new car. They can't afford the $1,200 home charging station. They can't afford the higher electricity bills that come with charging an EV. He looked up, all innocence. But you can. You already have the Tesla, so your Green New Deal works great for you. But what about the single mom working 2 jobs who needs a 10-year-old Honda Civic to get to work? Where does she get $48,000? Or should she just take the bus and arrive late to both jobs? The audience was riveted. Kennedy's tone was still friendly, still curious, but the questions were landing like body blows. Now, speaking of where you live, Kennedy continued, pulling out rental agreements, you currently reside in a luxury apartment building in the Navy Yard neighborhood of Washington, D.C. Beautiful area, very trendy. Your rent is $3,400 a month. He did the math out loud slowly. That's $40,800 per year, just for rent. You know what the average rent in the Bronx is? The area you represent? About $800 a month. You're paying almost double to live in luxury in D.C., while representing people who struggle to make any rent at all. Kennedy pulled out expense reports, held them up. And let's talk about your dining habits. Campaign finance reports show expenditures at some of New York and D.C.'s finest restaurants. Team dinners at places where the cheapest entree is $65. Strategy meetings over $400 bottles of wine. You've spent over $47,000 in campaign funds on high-end dining in the past 2 years. He read from one receipt with exaggerated care. Here's one strategy dinner. Le Bernardin, $1,847. That's one dinner, Congresswoman. One meal at a Michelin 3-star restaurant where the tasting menu costs $350 per person before wine. You spent almost $2,000 on one dinner while representing people who clip coupons to afford groceries. Kennedy leaned back, stroked his chin thoughtfully. So, let me see if this old Southern man can understand your economic philosophy correctly. Let me try to grasp the nuance. Working-class Americans need to sacrifice. They need to give up their affordable gas cars for expensive electric vehicles they can't afford. They need to accept higher energy costs. They need to limit their consumption. They need to fundamentally change their lifestyles for the environment and for economic justice. He paused for effect. But you get the Tesla. You get the $300-400 a month luxury apartment. You get to attend $35,000 parties. You get to eat at restaurants where one dinner costs more than your constituents spend on food in a month. You get to live exactly like the rich people you claim to oppose. His voice hardened just a fraction. That's not socialism, Congresswoman. That's not economic justice. That's aristocracy. That's let them eat cake with better branding. You're Marie Antoinette with an Instagram account and better publicity. You're telling people to sacrifice while you sacrifice nothing. AOC tried to defend herself. My lifestyle isn't relevant to the policy. Your lifestyle is completely relevant. Kennedy's voice cracked like a whip. Because it shows that you don't actually believe what you're preaching. If you really thought climate change was an existential crisis, you'd live in a modest apartment and donate the rent difference to environmental causes. If you really believed in economic equality, you'd live at the same level as your constituents. But you don't, because your socialism is for other people, not for you. He pulled out another thick folder. But if you think your lifestyle hypocrisy is bad, wait until we look at how you actually make your money. Because, Congresswoman, that's where your economic genius really shines through. Kennedy looked into the camera. If you're tired of champagne socialists who preach sacrifice while living in luxury, you need to hear what comes next, because her lifestyle is just the appetizer. Kennedy shifted papers around, pulled out a new section marked with bright red tabs. His expression was somewhere between amusement and disgust. Now, Congresswoman, you tried to deflect by saying we should focus on systemic issues rather than individual choices. I love that progressive trick. Avoid personal accountability by making everything systemic. But let's talk about a system. Specifically, let's talk about the system you created to funnel campaign money to your boyfriend. He pulled out Federal Election Commission filings, held them up. Riley Roberts, your boyfriend, now fiancé, if the tabloids are correct. Nice young man, I'm sure. Went to BU with you. And since 2018, his company, the LLC he set up, has received over $120,000 in payments from your campaign for marketing and consulting services. Kennedy put on his reading glasses, studied the documents with exaggerated concentration. Now, I've run campaigns for over 20 years, and $120,000 for marketing is a substantial amount of money. So naturally, I had my staff research what Mr. Roberts actually delivered for that six-figure payment. What did his consulting accomplish? What were the deliverables? He looked up, all innocent curiosity. Turns out nobody knows. No portfolio, no case studies, no documented marketing materials beyond what your regular campaign staff produced. No client testimonials except from your campaign. He got paid $120,000 to do what exactly? Help you pick Instagram filters? Proofread your tweets? Tell you which selfie angle works best? Scattered laughter from the conservative side of the gallery. AOC's face was turning crimson. But Mr. Roberts's consulting fees are just the beginning, Kennedy continued, pulling out merchandise sales reports. Let's talk about your real moneymaker, your campaign store, your merchandise empire. He held up a sweatshirt, price tag still attached. Tax the Rich sweatshirt. Retail price €50. Very popular with college kids who love socialism. You've sold thousands of these. Also available, Green New Deal t-shirts for $30. Abolish ICE hoodies for $65. Various other revolutionary merchandise. Total sales over the past 3 years. $42 million. Kennedy let that number hang in the air. $4.2 million. Selling anti-capitalism merchandise to college students. The irony is so thick I could spread it on toast. He pulled out a cost analysis spreadsheet. Now, let's talk about your profit margins. That $30 t-shirt, production cost, including the shirt printing and shipping, approximately $4.50. You're selling it for $30. That's a 566% markup. You're making better profit margins than most Fortune 500 companies. You're literally the capitalist pig dog your own slogans warn about. Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dripping with sarcasm. And where are these revolutionary garments manufactured? Well, that's interesting. You won't disclose. Your campaign store doesn't list the manufacturer. Very mysterious. But independent journalists have done some digging, and it appears the production is overseas. Possibly Bangladesh, possibly Vietnam. Definitely not American-made. Definitely not union labor. He looked directly at her. So just to summarize your business model, you're making capitalist-level profit margins selling socialist merchandise that's manufactured by underpaid foreign workers. And you're doing this while attacking American capitalism and preaching about workers' rights. Have I got that right? AOC tried to interrupt, but Kennedy held up a finger. Oh, I'm not done with your financial genius. Let's look at how your campaign spends money. He pulled out detailed expense reports. Your campaign has spent over $310,000 on luxury hotels and high-end restaurants over the past 2 years. Now, I understand campaigns have expenses, but let me read you some specific items because they're educational. Kennedy pulled out his reading glasses again, read slowly and deliberately. Team dinner, per se, $1,900. That's one of the most expensive restaurants in New York. The tasting menu costs $350 per person. Strategy meeting, Blue Hill, $1,240, another Manhattan fine dining establishment. Campaign retreat, luxury resort, $47,000 for a weekend for your staff. Travel, first-class airfare, $89,000 over 1 year, when Coach would have worked fine. Accommodations, 5-star hotels, $124,000, when Holiday Inns exist. He set the papers down, looked up at her. You spent more on one dinner at Per Se than many of your constituents spend on groceries in 2 months. You spent more on one weekend campaign retreat than the average American family makes in a year. And you did all of this while preaching about economic justice and attacking the wealthy for their excess. Kennedy pulled out his calculator, did some math. Here's what really gets me. If you'd stayed in mid-range hotels instead of luxury ones, if you'd flown Coach instead of first class, if you'd had your strategy meetings at Applebee's instead of Michelin-starred restaurants, your campaign would have saved approximately $287,000 over 2 years. You know what you could do with $287,000 in a district with widespread poverty? You could fund scholarships, job training programs, small business grants, actually help people. His voice hardened. But you didn't. You chose luxury. You chose excess. You chose to live exactly like the wealthy elites you constantly attack. Because your socialism is a brand, not a belief system. Kennedy shifted gears, pulled out a new document. But let's get back to your economics education, since that's what you offered me. You said I don't understand modern economic theory. So let's do some basic math. And I mean basic, the kind they teach in high school. He displayed a chart on the screen. Your Green New Deal proposes spending $93 trillion over 10 years. That's not my number. That's the CBO estimate. $93 trillion. Let's put that in perspective. The entire U.S. GDP, everything America produces in a year, is about $25 trillion. So your plan would cost roughly 37% of total U.S. economic output for a decade. Kennedy did the math on a whiteboard, speaking as he wrote. Now you say, we'll pay for it by taxing the rich. Okay, let's examine that. Total wealth of all U.S. billionaires combined, approximately $5 trillion. If we confiscated, not taxed, confiscated, every single penny from every billionaire in America, liquidated all their assets, took everything, we'd have $5 trillion. He circled the numbers. Your plan costs $93 trillion. Confiscating all billionaire wealth gives us $5 trillion. You're $88 trillion short. That's not a rounding error, Congresswoman. That's a mathematical impossibility. Kennedy turned to face her directly. So, please educate me. Use your modern economic theory. Explain how you pay for a $93 trillion plan when confiscating all billionaire wealth only gets you $5 trillion. Show me the nuance I'm missing. Walk me through the complexity. Silence. AOC opened her mouth, closed it, shuffled papers. Can't explain it? Kennedy asked gently. That's okay. Let me offer an explanation. You can't pay for it. It's mathematically impossible. You pulled a number out of thin air that sounds revolutionary and exciting to people who don't understand basic arithmetic. But anyone who can do fourth-grade math can see it doesn't work. He gathered his papers. See, Congresswoman, this is what happens when someone who barely passed undergraduate economics classes tries to lecture someone who studied under Nobel Prize-winning economists. You don't understand basic concepts like scarcity, trade-offs, or the relationship between taxation and revenue. You understand merchandising. You understand branding. You understand how to pay your boyfriend from campaign funds. You understand capitalism just fine when you're the one profiting from it. Kennedy's voice took on a sharp edge. You told me I need an economics class. Congresswoman, you need a class in basic arithmetic and honesty and recognizing hypocrisy when you're living it every single day. He pulled out another massive folder. But if you think your economic illiteracy is bad, wait until we examine the real-world consequences of your policies. Let's talk about what happened when people actually listened to you. Let's talk about Amazon. He looked at the camera. If you think politicians should understand basic math before proposing multi-trillion-dollar plans, you need to hear what comes next. Because we're about to examine what AOC's economic genius looks like when it meets reality. Kennedy's expression shifted from mockery to something more serious. Genuine anger mixed with disappointment. He pulled out a thick folder marked Amazon HQ Economic Impact Analysis. Congresswoman, you tried to pivot to your accomplishments, and you've mentioned several times your proudest moment. Killing the Amazon HQ2 deal in Queens. You celebrated it. You called it a victory against corporate greed. You said you were protecting your community from gentrification and exploitation. He opened the folder, and his voice took on a harder edge. So let's examine your great victory. Let's look at what you actually accomplished. Because I think the people of Queens deserve to know what their representative cost them. Kennedy displayed an economic impact study on the screen. November 2018, Amazon announced they would build their second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens. The deal would bring 25,000 jobs over 10 to 15 years. The average salary on $50,000. Total economic impact over 10 years, $27 billion. The city and state offered $3 billion in tax incentives, which sounds like a lot, until you realize the net tax revenue would still be $18 billion. Three separate economists, one liberal, one conservative, one independent, all analyzed the deal and came to the same conclusion. It was a massive win for New York. He pulled out job projections. But it wasn't just 25,000 direct Amazon jobs. The economic ripple effect would create an estimated 67,000 additional indirect jobs. Construction workers building the facilities. Restaurant workers serving the employees. Retail workers in the stores that would open. Service industry jobs. Small business opportunities. 75,000 total jobs created by one project. Kennedy looked up from his papers, his voice thick with emotion. And you killed it. You organized protests. You pressured politicians. You called Amazon a greedy corporation that didn't deserve New York. And they left, took the deal to Virginia instead. Virginia got the jobs. Virginia got the tax revenue. Virginia got the economic growth, and Queens got you. He pulled out a video player, queued up testimony. I want you to meet some people, Congresswoman. Some folks whose lives you changed when you killed this deal. The first video played a middle-aged Latina woman sitting in a modest living room. This is Maria Torres. She's 52 years old, works as an administrative assistant, making $42,000 a year. When Amazon announced HQ2, she applied for a construction administrator position that would pay $78,000. She made it to the second round of interviews. She was qualified. She was excited. That job would have changed her life. She could have paid off debt, helped her daughter with college, maybe even retired someday. Kennedy stopped the video. But you killed the deal. Maria is still making $42,000, still struggling, still working paycheck to paycheck. But at least you protected her from corporate greed, right? The next video showed a young Asian man in his late 20s. This is James Park, computer science degree from CUNY, grew up in Flushing, loves his neighborhood, loves his community. Amazon offered him a software engineering position starting at $120,000. When you killed the deal, James had a choice: stay in Queens without that job or move. He moved to Seattle to take the same job at Amazon there. Kennedy's voice rose. James is not in Queens anymore. His family is there. His friends are there. His community is there. But he's not, because you decided that corporate greed was worse than keeping talented young people in their own communities. Virginia and Washington got James. Queens lost him. Great victory, Congresswoman. A third video, an older man, clearly upset, sitting in what looked like a closed restaurant. This is Robert Santos. He owned a restaurant near the proposed Amazon site for 32 years. When Amazon announced the project, Robert saw opportunity. He took out loans to expand, hired more staff, upgraded his kitchen. He was preparing for the boom. Kennedy paused the video, his voice heavy. When you killed the deal, Robert was left with debt he couldn't pay and expenses he couldn't cover. He held on for 18 months, but finally closed in 2020. 32 years in business, a family legacy, gone. Because you didn't understand that sometimes business growth helps working people. He pulled out a comprehensive report. Robert's not alone. 47 small businesses in the Long Island City area closed between 2019 and 2021. They had expanded in anticipation of Amazon. They had hired staff. They had invested money. And when you pulled the rug out, they collapsed. Kennedy's voice was rising now, genuine anger coming through. But let's talk about the bigger picture. Those 67,000 jobs that would have been created. Let's put that in human terms. That's 67,000 families with better incomes. That's kids who could go to college. That's parents who could retire with dignity. That's people who could afford health care, buy homes, build wealth. All gone because of your economic illiteracy. He pulled out tax revenue projections. The $18 billion in net tax revenue that New York lost. You know what that could have funded? Schools, infrastructure, housing programs, all the social programs you claim to support. But you killed the deal that would have paid for them. Kennedy walked toward her position, his folksy manner completely gone now. And here's the most infuriating part. 6 months after you killed 25,000 jobs in Queens, where did you move? From your modest apartment in the Bronx to a luxury building in Navy Yard, D.C.? Rent went from $1,600 to $3,400. You could afford the upgrade because you're making $174,000 a year in congressional salary, plus all that merchandise income, plus your speaking fees. His voice dripped with contempt. Maria Torres can't afford an upgrade. She's still in the same apartment, still struggling with the same salary. James Park had to leave his home. Robert Santos lost his business. But you're doing fantastic. Living in luxury, driving your Tesla, attending galas. The consequences of your decisions don't affect you at all. Kennedy returned to his desk, pulled out a final document. And you know what the cruelest irony is? Amazon is doing fine. They took the deal to Virginia. Like I said, they're building HQ2 there, creating those same jobs, generating that same economic growth. Everything you said would happen in Queens is happening, just in Virginia instead. You didn't stop Amazon. You didn't strike a blow against corporate greed. You just deprived your own constituents of opportunity. He looked directly at her, his voice quiet but cutting. You didn't fight corporate greed, Congresswoman. You fought opportunity. You fought prosperity. You fought working-class families trying to get ahead. And you did it from a position of privilege that none of them will ever know. Kennedy gathered his papers. Those 25,000 jobs are real jobs now in Virginia, making $150,000 a year, supporting families, creating opportunities. And every single one of them could have been in Queens, could have been your constituents, could have been Maria and James and the families of people who shop at Robert's restaurant. His voice rose to a crescendo. But you decided ideology was more important than opportunity. You decided your brand, being the anti-corporate warrior, was more important than people's livelihoods. And Queens will be recovering from your decision for decades. He looked into the camera. If you know someone who lost out because of the Amazon decision, if you're tired of politicians who sacrifice real people for political points, if you understand that sometimes business growth actually helps communities, share this. Because 67,000 lost jobs deserve to be remembered. Kennedy turned back to AOC. But we're not done examining the consequences of your economic genius. Let's talk about another brilliant idea you championed. Defunding the police. Because that worked out real well, didn't it? Kennedy pulled out a new folder, and his expression was something between anger and genuine sadness. Congresswoman, in 2020, you became one of the leading voices for defunding police departments. You marched with activists. You gave speeches. You tweeted constantly. You made it your mission. So, let's examine what happened when people actually listened to you. He pulled out a compilation of her own statements. Let me read some of your quotes. June 2020. Defunding police means defunding police. July 2020. We need to completely reimagine public safety. August 2020. Police departments are inherently violent institutions. These aren't out of context. These are your positions, your beliefs, your policy advocacy. Kennedy displayed crime statistics on the screen. New York City listened to you. In June 2020, the City Council voted to cut NYPD's budget by $1 billion. $1 billion. You celebrated. You called it a victory for justice. So, let's look at what that victory cost. He read from NYPD crime statistics, but narrated them as stories. In 2019, before the cuts, New York had 319 murders. In 2020, after you defunded police, that number jumped to 468. That's 149 additional murders. That's not a statistic, Congresswoman. That's 149 families who lost someone. 149 funerals. 149 lives ended because the police department you gutted couldn't protect them. Kennedy's voice grew heavier. Shootings doubled from 777 to 1,531. Grand larceny, that's serious theft, increased 66%. Burglaries up 42%. Felony assaults up 17%. Every major crime category increased. The city became measurably, significantly less safe because of the policies you championed. He pulled out letters, held them up. I've got testimony from people affected by this. Let me read you one. Kennedy's voice was thick with emotion as he read. Dear Senator Kennedy, my name is Carmen Ramirez. I live in the South Bronx, in Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's district. On March 15, 2021, my 19-year-old son, Marcus, was walking home from his job at a grocery store. Two men tried to rob him. He had $47 in his pocket, his night's tips. They shot him for $47. I called 911 at 10:47 p.m. The police arrived at 11:10 p.m., 23 minutes. Before the budget cuts, average response time in my neighborhood was 8 minutes. 8 minutes. If they'd arrived in 8 minutes, maybe Marcus would still be alive. Maybe I'd still have my son. Maybe I'd still have grandchildren someday. But Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez said we needed to defund police. She said we'd be safer. She was wrong. My son is dead, and she's never even called me. The hearing room was absolutely silent. Kennedy sat the letter down carefully. Carmen wrote that letter 6 months ago. You still haven't called her. You still haven't acknowledged Marcus. But you've done dozens of Instagram videos about police violence. Funny how that works. He pulled out another letter. This is from David Chen. He owned a grocery store in Flushing for 40 years. After the budget cuts and officer shortages, his store was robbed 3 times in 2021. Each time, police took over an hour to respond. Each time, he asked for increased patrols. Each time, he was told there weren't enough officers. In December 2021, he closed his store. Too dangerous, too expensive to maintain security without police support. 40 years of serving his community. Gone. Kennedy looked up, his voice hard. But here's where your hypocrisy reaches truly obscene levels. He pulled out security expenditure reports. While you were defunding police for regular New Yorkers, how much did taxpayers spend protecting you? Let me tell you, Capitol Police protection when you're in D.C., $387,000 in 2021 alone. NYPD security detail when you visit New York, another $120,000. Over $500,000 in public money protecting you while you strip protection from your constituents. Kennedy pulled out Capitol Police request logs. And you haven't just accepted that protection passively. You've requested additional security 17 times in 2 years. For protests outside your office. For mean tweets. For online threats. Every time you feel unsafe, you ask for more police protection. His voice rose with righteous anger. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. When you're scared, you get armed police officers. When Carmen Ramirez's son is walking home from work, he gets a 23-minute response time and a funeral. When you face online harassment, you get a security detail. When David Chen's store is being robbed, he gets a recording telling him officers are unavailable. You get protection. Working-class people in high-crime neighborhoods get reimagined public safety. Kennedy stood up, walked toward her. What does reimagined public safety mean to Carmen Ramirez? It means burying her son. What does it mean to David Chen? It means closing his business. What does it mean to the thousands of New Yorkers victimized by the crime surge? It means longer response times, fewer officers, and the knowledge that their elected representative cares more about political statements than their safety. He pulled out comparative data. You know what's interesting? Wealthy neighborhoods in New York, where your donors live, where celebrities live, they hired private security when you defunded police. Crime barely increased there. But in poor neighborhoods, in working-class communities, crime exploded because they can't afford private security. They depend on public police. The police you gutted. Kennedy's voice became cutting. So, your defund policy created a two-tier system. Rich people get private security. Poor people get crime. You get $500,000 in police protection. Carmen Ramirez gets a dead son and no callback. He returned to his seat. That's not criminal justice reform, Congresswoman. That's aristocracy. That's you living behind walls with armed guards while the people you represent dodge bullets. And then you have the nerve to lecture people about privilege and systemic injustice. Kennedy looked into the camera. If rising crime has affected you or someone you love, if you're tired of politicians who demand security for themselves while taking it away from you, if Marcus Ramirez deserves better than being ignored, share this everywhere. He turned back to AOC. But I want to talk about one more example of your moral bankruptcy, because it shows who you really are better than anything else. Let's talk about your grandmother. Kennedy's tone shifted, became almost quiet, but the anger underneath was palpable. Congresswoman, in June 2021, you posted pictures on social media of your grandmother's home in Puerto Rico. The roof was damaged from Hurricane Maria, which hit in 2017, 4 years earlier. The conditions were terrible. You blamed Trump. You blamed the federal government. You blamed everyone except yourself. And you used your grandmother's suffering to score political points. He pulled out the social media posts, displayed them on screen. You wrote, "Just over a week ago, my abuela fell ill. I went to Puerto Rico to see her. My first time in a decade. This is her home. Hurricane Maria relief hasn't arrived. Trump blocked relief dollars for PR. People are being forced to flee ancestral homes, and developers are taking them." Kennedy looked up. Very moving, very emotional. Great engagement on the post. And people responded with sympathy and outrage. How could the government let this happen? How could an elderly woman be left in these conditions? He pulled out news articles. Then something interesting happened. A conservative commentator named Matt Walsh set up a GoFundMe to help your grandmother. He wanted to prove that Americans care about people regardless of politics. And you know what happened? People donated. Republicans, independents, even some Democrats. They raised over $100,000 in 3 days. $100,000 to help your grandmother fix her home. Kennedy paused. Let that sink in. And what did you do? You rejected it. You had your family refuse the money. Your grandmother continued living in that house with the damaged roof. And you know why? He pulled out her spokesperson's statement. Your spokesperson said, "We don't need money from right-wing provocateurs." That was the official position. The money came from the wrong people, so your grandmother couldn't have it. Better for her to suffer than accept help from conservatives. Kennedy's voice rose with genuine anger. You exploited your grandmother's suffering for political points. You used her damaged home to attack Trump, to attack Republicans, to build your brand as someone who cares about Puerto Rico. And when people tried to help, when Americans from across the political spectrum donated their hard-earned money, you refused it because accepting would undermine your narrative. He pulled out financial documents. Now, let's talk about your own finances during this time, June 2021, when you posted those pictures. You were living in your $3,400 a month luxury apartment, driving your $48,000 Tesla. Your net worth was approximately $1.5 million, mostly from your merchandise sales and speaking fees. Your grandmother needed maybe $30,000 to fix her roof and make the house livable. Kennedy did the math on screen. You made $174,000 in congressional salary that year. You made approximately $800,000 from merchandise and speaking fees. You had $1.5 million in net worth. Your grandmother needed $30,000. That's 2% of your net worth. You could have written a check. You could have fixed it yourself. You could have quietly helped your own family. His voice became sharp. But you didn't. You didn't help her. Instead, you exploited her suffering for social media engagement. You used her damaged home to attack your political enemies. And when those enemies offered to help, you refused on her behalf because their help would hurt your brand. Kennedy pulled out timeline documents. You know what's really sick? You kept posting about your grandmother's struggles for months, used her in multiple speeches about Puerto Rico and climate change and government failure, but you never mentioned that $100,000 had been raised and rejected. You never mentioned that help was available. You just kept exploiting her suffering. He looked directly at AOC, disgust evident on his face. So, let me summarize. You used your grandmother's suffering to score political points. When people offered to help, you refused because they were the wrong political party. You let her continue living in terrible conditions while you lived in luxury. And you did all of this while claiming to care about the vulnerable, about family, about community. Kennedy's voice dropped to something dangerous. That's not politics, Congresswoman. That's sociopathy. That's using your own grandmother as a prop. That's valuing your brand over her well-being. That's choosing political advantage over family. And it shows everyone exactly who you really are. He pulled out one final document. Eventually, quietly, about 6 months later, your grandmother's roof got fixed. No press release from you, no social media posts, just quietly done. People suspect your family finally accepted some of that donated money after the news cycle moved on. But you've never confirmed it. Very convenient. Kennedy gathered his papers. You know what would have happened if I used my grandmother's suffering for political points and then refused help for her because it came from Democrats? I'd never win another election in Louisiana. But you got sympathy. You got engagement. You got to keep playing the victim while victimizing your own family member. He looked into the camera. If this disgusts you as much as it should, if you believe family should come before politics, if you think using your grandmother's suffering for social media clout is morally bankrupt, share this everywhere. Kennedy turned back to AOC, and his expression was cold. But we're running out of time, so let me bring this all together. Let me give you the education you offered me. Let me show you what real economics looks like. And let me explain why everything you believe is wrong. Kennedy stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the center of the hearing room. His entire demeanor had changed. No more folksy charm, no more Southern gentleman routine. This was a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. Congresswoman, at the beginning of this hearing, you suggested I take an economics class. You implied that I'm too old, too Southern, too uneducated to understand your modern economic theories. You said I rely on outdated thinking and don't grasp contemporary economic systems. He paused, looked directly at her. So, let me return the favor. Let me educate you, not with buzzwords and slogans, but with actual economic principles, with logic, with arithmetic, with reality. Kennedy pulled out his comprehensive notes. Economics isn't complicated at its core. It's about trade-offs. Resources are scarce. Time is limited. Every choice has an opportunity cost. When you choose to spend money on one thing, you can't spend it on another. When you implement one policy, you accept the consequences. These aren't abstract theories. These are fundamental realities of how the world works. He displayed a simple chart. You want to spend $93 trillion on the Green New Deal. Okay, let's accept that number for the sake of argument. Where does that money come from? You say tax the rich. We already established that's mathematically impossible. Confiscating all billionaire wealth gives you $5 trillion, not $93 trillion. So let's look at what would actually happen. Kennedy walked to a whiteboard, started writing. To raise $93 trillion over 10 years, you'd need to increase federal revenue by $9.3 trillion per year. Current federal revenue is about $4.5 trillion, so you'd need to more than triple tax revenue. That means tax rates would have to increase across all income levels, not just the rich. Everyone. Middle-class families would see their taxes double or triple. He turned to face her. Now, what happens when you triple taxes? Basic economics, the kind they teach at universities like Vanderbilt and Oxford, tells us that high tax rates reduce economic activity. People work less when they keep less of their income. Businesses invest less when profits are taxed more heavily. Economic growth slows or stops entirely. Kennedy wrote more numbers. When economic growth slows, tax revenue actually decreases, not increases. It's called the Laffer curve. High tax rates eventually generate less revenue than moderate rates because they kill the economy. So, your plan to raise $93 trillion by taxing the rich would actually shrink the economy and reduce total revenue. You'd end up with less money, not more. He set down the marker, walked toward her. But let's say we ignore all that. Let's say magic happens and you get your $93 trillion. What do you actually accomplish? You want to eliminate fossil fuels within 10 years? That's 10 million direct and indirect jobs in oil, gas, coal, and related industries. What happens to those people? Kennedy's voice intensified. You say job retraining. Great, wonderful. Let me tell you about Joe Thompson. Fictional name, but based on dozens of real people I've met. Joe is 52 years old. He's worked in coal mines in West Virginia for 30 years. He makes $67,000 a year. Hard work, dangerous work, but honest work that feeds his family. Under your plan, Joe loses his job. You offer him job retraining to become a solar panel installer. That pays $32,000 a year, less than half his current salary. Joe has a mortgage payment of $1,400 a month. His daughter is in college, $15,000 a year. His wife has medical bills. How does Joe survive on $32,000 when his expenses require $67,000? Kennedy's voice rose. He doesn't. He loses his house. His daughter drops out of college. His family falls apart. But you don't care about Joe because Joe doesn't live in Brooklyn or Queens. Joe lives in West Virginia, in a place you've never been and will never visit. Joe is just collateral damage in your revolution. He pulled out more data, and Joe is one of 10 million people whose jobs you'd eliminate, 10 million families you'd destroy, all for a plan that wouldn't even accomplish its goals because China and India and developing nations would continue using fossil fuels, making American sacrifice pointless. Kennedy walked to another section of the board. But let's talk about your other brilliant policy, defunding police. You saw what happened in New York. Crime soared. Response times increased. People died. Basic economics explains why. When you reduce the supply of something, in this case, police protection, and demand stays the same, you get shortages, longer response times, less coverage, more crime. He turned to face her. The people who suffer most from reduced police protection are poor people in high-crime neighborhoods. Rich people hire private security. They're fine. But working-class families who depend on public police? They suffer. That's basic economics. You reduced supply, created a shortage, and the poorest people paid the price. Kennedy's voice became cutting. Now, let's talk about Amazon. You killed a deal that would have created 67,000 jobs and generated $27 billion in economic growth. You said it was corporate greed, that the tax incentives were corporate welfare. Let me explain why you're wrong. He wrote on the board again. Amazon would have paid $27 billion in total economic value over 10 years. New York offered $3 billion in tax incentives. Net benefit? $24 billion. That's not welfare. That's an investment that pays 100% returns. No investor anywhere wouldn't take that deal. Kennedy looked at her. But you don't understand investment. You don't understand that sometimes you give up short-term revenue to gain long-term growth. You see $3 billion in tax breaks and think giveaway without understanding the $27 billion you'd get back. That's not economics. That's economic illiteracy. He returned to his seat, pulled out his comprehensive notes. Let me tell you about my economics education, since you suggested I need one. Kennedy's voice became formal, professional. I studied economics at Vanderbilt University, where I learned about supply and demand, market equilibrium, the role of price signals in allocating resources. I graduated with honors. Then I went to the University of Virginia School of Law, where I studied constitutional economics, how economic principles interact with legal and political systems. Then I went to Oxford University on a Rhodes Scholarship. He paused for effect. At Oxford, I studied under Professor John Eatwell, among others. Professor Eatwell taught me advanced economic theory, including socialist and Marxist economics. I didn't just learn why socialism sounds appealing in theory. I learned why it fails in practice, why central planning can't match market efficiency, why removing profit incentives reduces innovation and productivity, why every socialist experiment in history has ended in poverty, authoritarianism, or both. Kennedy's voice hardened. I've forgotten more about economics than you've ever learned. I've studied it longer than you've been alive. I've seen socialist policies fail in real countries, destroy real economies, devastate real people. And I've watched bartenders turned politicians with bachelor's degrees and unlimited confidence lecture people about economics while understanding nothing. He stood again, walked toward her. You want to know what modern economics teaches? It teaches that incentives matter, that free markets allocate resources more efficiently than governments, that property rights create prosperity, that socialist policies fail because they violate basic human nature. People work harder when they benefit personally from their labor. Kennedy pulled out academic papers. These are from current economists, Nobel Prize winners, Federal Reserve officials, people at the top of the field. Every single one says your Green New Deal is economically illiterate. Not Republican talking points. Economic consensus. Your policies don't work. They've never worked. They'll never work because they ignore fundamental economic realities. He looked directly at her, his voice becoming personal. You've never created a job. You've never built a business. You've never made payroll. You've never struggled with choosing between rent and food. You went from bartender to congresswoman to millionaire in 3 years. You live in luxury, drive a Tesla, wear designer clothes, eat at expensive restaurants, and now you lecture working people about sacrifice. Kennedy's voice rose to a crescendo. You killed 67,000 jobs with your Amazon decision. You caused a crime surge with your defund policy. You exploited your grandmother for political points. You funnel campaign money to your boyfriend. You sell $4 million in merchandise while preaching about capitalism. You live in a $300 to $400 apartment while representing people who struggle with $1,800 rent. You attend $35,000 galas while lecturing about inequality. He walked right up to her position, staring down at her. And you have the audacity, the sheer breathtaking arrogance, to suggest that I need an economics education. Kennedy's voice dropped to something quiet, but dangerous. Let me tell you what I understand that you don't. I understand that capitalism has lifted more people out of poverty than any system in human history. I understand that free markets work, and central planning fails. I understand that jobs are better than handouts. Opportunity is better than dependency. And freedom is better than government control. I understand that when politicians promise free things, someone always pays. I understand that good intentions don't excuse bad outcomes. He gathered his accordion file, held it up. This file contains your record, your votes, your statements, your policies, your failures. Every piece of evidence I've presented today came from your own actions, your own words, your own choices. I didn't make any of it up. I didn't take anything out of context. This is who you are. Kennedy looked into the camera one final time. If you're tired of privileged socialists who've never created a job lecturing you about economics, if you're tired of politicians who live like capitalists while preaching socialism, if you're tired of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, share this everywhere. Record it. Save it. Show it to everyone who thinks she's the future of anything. Because Americans deserve better than a congresswoman who doesn't understand economics, doesn't understand math, and doesn't understand the difference between a slogan and a solution. He turned back to AOC, his expression cold. Class dismissed, Congresswoman. I hope you learned something. Though based on your entire record, I seriously doubt it. Kennedy sat down, closed his accordion file with a definitive snap, and folded his hands. The hearing room was absolutely silent. You could hear people breathing, camera shutters clicking, someone coughing nervously, but no one spoke. AOC sat frozen. Her face was a mix of rage and humiliation. She'd walked into the hearing confident, surrounded by squad supporters, ready to promote her Green New Deal. She'd insulted Kennedy, thinking he was an easy target, an old Southern senator she could embarrass with her superior modern understanding. Instead, she'd been systematically destroyed, every policy examined and found wanting, every claim debunked with evidence, every defense demolished with facts, her lifestyle hypocrisy exposed, her economic illiteracy revealed, her moral bankruptcy documented. The committee chairman cleared his throat. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, would you like to respond to Senator Kennedy's questions? She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. Nothing coherent came out. She shuffled papers frantically, looking for talking points. But what could she say? Everything Kennedy presented was documented. Her own words, her own votes, her own financial records, public information. This is clearly a partisan attack, she finally managed, her voice shaking. Based on sexism and ageism and— Ma'am, Kennedy interrupted gently, his Southern courtesy returning. I cited your own campaign finance filings, your own public statements, your own voting record, and basic arithmetic. If facts are sexist, then reality has a bias problem. AOC tried again. The senator is taking things out of context, and I read your full speeches. I provided complete quotes. I gave context. The context makes it worse, not better. One more attempt. This hearing is a distraction from real issues. Kennedy smiled that dangerous smile. The real issues are economic literacy, honest government, and understanding that policies have consequences. We just spent 2 hours on real issues. Very real. Painfully real for the 67,000 people who didn't get Amazon jobs and Carmen Ramirez, who lost her son. AOC stood abruptly, gathered her papers with shaking hands, and walked out. Didn't wait to be dismissed. Didn't make a closing statement. Just left, her squad supporters scrambling after her, the cameras capturing every moment of her retreat. The hearing room erupted. Reporters sprinted for the exits, already typing on their phones. Conservative gallery members applauded, not mockingly, but in genuine appreciation for accountability. Even some Democrats looked thoughtful, troubled by what they'd witnessed. Kennedy just sat quietly organizing his papers back into that massive accordion file, looking like he'd just finished a routine day at the office. Because, for him, it was routine. 40 years as a lawyer. Prepare thoroughly. Present evidence clearly. Let facts speak. And when someone insults you, prove them wrong so completely they can't recover. Within 12 minutes, #Louisiana Lesson was trending #1 on Twitter globally. Within an hour, the video clips had 15 million views. By the end of the day, 89 million people had watched some portion of Kennedy's systematic dismantling of AOC's record. Every major news outlet had to cover it. CNN tried to defend her but couldn't get around the documented evidence. MSNBC called it troubling, but had to acknowledge the facts. Fox News played it on loop. Conservative outlets called it the greatest political takedown in modern history. But the impact went deeper than cable news chatter. The next morning, a moderate Democrat named Jennifer Williams announced a primary challenge to AOC. Williams was a former prosecutor, daughter of Puerto Rican immigrants, grew up in the Bronx. Her announcement speech was simple. I love our community. I understand economics, and I won't use my grandmother's suffering for Instagram likes. Within the first week, Williams raised $3.2 million, more than AOC raised in her entire first campaign. Donations poured in from across the country, from conservatives who'd never vote for a Democrat, but wanted AOC gone. From moderate Democrats embarrassed by her extremism, from people who'd lost Amazon jobs, from crime victims, from families struggling with energy costs. The polling was devastating. AOC's approval rating in her district dropped 34 points in 2 weeks. The negatives were brutal. 67% said, she doesn't understand economics. 71% said, she cares more about fame than constituents. 58% said she should resign. Even worse for her, the squad started distancing themselves. Rashida Tlaib made vague statements about focusing on Detroit. Ayanna Pressley suddenly had scheduling conflicts when asked to campaign with AOC. Even Ilhan Omar, not exactly known for political wisdom herself, quietly stopped mentioning her. National Democratic leadership saw the writing on the wall. They privately asked AOC to step back from high-profile positions. When she refused, they stripped her from committee assignments, citing the need for members who understand policy details. Her media appearances dried up. Cable news stopped booking her. The Kennedy hearing had exposed her too thoroughly, made her too much of a liability. Political shows didn't want guests who could be destroyed with basic fact-checking. Even friendly outlets became cautious. The merchandise empire collapsed. Turns out, people don't want to buy tax-the-rich sweatshirts from someone exposed as a champagne socialist. Sales dropped 87% within a month. Her campaign had to lay off staff, couldn't afford the fancy offices, had to scale back operations dramatically. Speaking fees plummeted from $40,000 per appearance to $5,000. And even those dried up as organizations realized she was more liability than draw. The luxury apartment became unaffordable. She quietly moved to a modest one-bedroom in a less trendy neighborhood. But the most significant impact was on progressive politics more broadly. The Kennedy hearing became a case study in what happens when progressive policies meet scrutiny, when slogans face facts, when confident ignorance meets documented knowledge. Other progressive politicians started moderating their positions. References to the Green New Deal became less specific, more vague. Defund police morphed into reform police. The socialist revolution talk quieted down considerably. 18 months after the Louisiana lesson, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez lost her primary to Jennifer Williams by 23 points. It wasn't even close. Her district had seen enough. They wanted someone who understood economics, who showed up for constituents, who put Queens before Instagram. AOC is no longer in Congress. She works as a political commentator for fringe progressive outlets, doing podcasts and YouTube videos for audiences that shrink monthly. She still tweets, but the engagement is a fraction of what it was. The blue check mark remains, but the influence is gone. She lives in a modest apartment in the Bronx. Had to sell the Tesla, bought a used Honda. The designer clothes are gone. The luxury lifestyle evaporated. She experienced downward mobility in real time, learning what her policies would have done to millions of Americans. Her memoir was quietly canceled by her publisher. The documentary about her that was in production was shelved. She's become a cautionary tale rather than a rising star. Political science professors teach the Kennedy hearing as an example of what happens when preparation meets opportunity, when facts defeat slogans. And Senator John Kennedy? He's still in the Senate, still asking questions in that folksy drawl, still pulling out accordion files when someone needs accountability. The file from the AOC hearing was donated to the Smithsonian as an artifact of political history. But more importantly, Kennedy proved something essential. Respect isn't determined by age or accent or geography. It's earned through knowledge, integrity, and results. And when you lack all three, don't insult someone who has them. The accordion file became legendary in Washington. When politicians testify before committees Kennedy sits on, they prepare exhaustively. They check their facts. They verify their numbers. They make sure their lifestyle matches their rhetoric. Because nobody wants to be the next AOC. The Louisiana lesson wasn't just about one congresswoman's downfall. It was about the triumph of facts over feelings, arithmetic over ideology, competence over confidence. It was about understanding that you can't spend money you don't have, no matter how good your intentions. That eliminating jobs hurts the people who had those jobs. That defunding police leads to more crime. That exploiting family for political gain is morally bankrupt. It was about recognizing that experience matters, that education is more than a bachelor's degree, that someone who studied under Nobel Prize winners might know more about economics than someone who bartended through college. But most fundamentally, it was about accountability, about the idea that politicians should be judged by their results, not their rhetoric, by their competence, not their confidence, by whether they actually help people, not whether they sound good on social media. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thought 9 words would embarrass an old Southern senator. Perhaps the senator should take an economics class. 9 words spoken with such casual contempt, such unearned arrogance, such certainty that she was smarter than everyone else. She was wrong, and for 2 hours, Senator John Kennedy, Rhodes Scholar, Oxford economist, Louisiana lawyer, educated her in ways she never expected and will never forget. He taught her that capitalism lifts people out of poverty while socialism keeps them there, that free markets work and central planning fails, that jobs are better than handouts and opportunity beats dependency, that good intentions don't excuse bad outcomes, and confidence is no substitute for competence. He taught her that when you kill 67,000 jobs, families suffer, that when you defund police, crime increases, that when you exploit your grandmother, people notice, that when you live like a capitalist while preaching socialism, you're a hypocrite, that when you funnel campaign money to your boyfriend while attacking corruption, you're a fraud. Most importantly, he taught her and everyone watching that there are consequences for actions, that policies affect real people, that elections have consequences, that arithmetic doesn't care about your ideology. The accordion file contained 37 sections of documentation, hundreds of pages, thousands of facts. All of it public record. All of it AOC's own doing. Senator Kennedy didn't destroy Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's career that day. She destroyed it herself through years of hypocrisy, economic illiteracy, and moral bankruptcy. Kennedy just documented it, organized it, and presented it clearly enough that everyone could see it. That's not a partisan attack. That's accountability. And it's beautiful. If you believe competence beats confidence, if you think experience matters more than slogans, if you're tired of privileged socialists lecturing working Americans about economics while living in luxury, share this story everywhere. Comment below with your own experience of politicians who promise everything and deliver nothing. Because this is what accountability looks like. This is what happens when facts meet feelings and facts win. This is what happens when a bartender with a bachelor's degree insults a Rhodes Scholar with an accordion file. Senator John Kennedy didn't just defeat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that day. He reminded America that we don't have to accept economic illiteracy, moral hypocrisy, and confident ignorance from our representatives. We can demand better. We can expect more. We can hold them accountable. And when they insult us, or insult those who represent us, we can educate them right back. That's not simple-minded. That's American. Class dismissed.